My grandfather's 70th birthday was last week. It was a big deal to my family, and to celebrate, we decided to make a trip up to the mountains and stay the weekend at my grandparents' cabin. It was Saturday night, and we had just got home from the party at the golf club my grandfather is a member of. It was loud, boisterous, and just like my family likes, complete with an open bar. Most of them were exhausted after the event. While they made their way to their respective guest rooms, I headed downstairs to make myself a nightcap. I had just been broken up with that week. It was the longest relationship I've been in, and I was still not used to sleeping alone. I figured some alcohol could ease the process. As I was making my way down the steps to the first floor, the stairs groaned under my weight. I could foresee the conversation tomorrow between my mother and I. "You kept me up all night with your racket." I resigned myself to my future fate and continued onward. The cabin was full of the scent of pine, rain, and firewood. Outside, water speckled the windows, like the wind itself was trying to recreate a Pollock painting. Cracks and pops of crisping firewood echoed throughout the ground floor. This cabin has, a quality about it that makes you forget about the outside world. Down the mountain was work, responsibilities, and expectations. But in the safety of the cabin, you could have true respite. My breakup didn't feel so bad up here. I could hear the familiar clink of ice hitting glass downstairs, and the inedible glug of liquor as it wrapped itself around two cold stones as to not dilute the flavor. I turned the corner to the kitchen, and the warm glow from the light underneath the microwave greeted me. Behind the kitchen's island stood my grandfather. He was a tall man with snow-white hair, a matching burly beard, and even in his old age, he had a sturdy frame. My grandfather served in Vietnam, and afterwards he was a cop for 20 years in Chicago. My father would talk about his father, like how the boys in my middle school class would jabber on about the latest Sentai episode they just watched. He was a hero to my old man, but I didn't see my grandpa in his prime. All I got was an old man who smiled big and laughed bigger. Tonight there was no smile on my grandfather's face. Tonight, there was an emotion etched on his face so deep that he looked like a Gothic sculpture. Regret, maybe? He poured a tall glass of scotch, and in between his fingers was a thick cigar already cut. I've never seen my grandfather smoke. I only heard about it as a cautionary tale. "Do me a favor and don't ever start smoking," he would ask me whenever he saw my mother or father step outside for their nightly ritual, only to come back smelling the way only smokers can. He looked up and met my gaze, then reached down below the counter and placed his second glass next to his. "Drinking, like dancing, is best shared with a partner," he mused. He poured his second glass and slid it across the granite countertop. "Everything all right?" I asked while picking up the cup. "Right as rain. Would you care to join me by the fire?" He motioned towards the chairs that faced the fire. Most saw our fireplace as a real estate for a TV mount, but the cabin did not allow for any electronics. It was a rule: no screens. If you wanted entertainment, look to those around you. Of course, I beamed. Politeness aside, this was a unique opportunity to talk with my grandfather. I wanted to see the man my father saw, even if it was just a peek. We talked for about 20 minutes, just him and I. He asked the basic questions any family member asks. How's work? Are you seeing anyone? Are you still living in the same place? Eventually, the conversation hit the lull all talks do. When you run out of pleasantries and you're left grasping for anything to fill the silence. if my grandfather was uncomfortable with this empty air between us. He didn't show it. He sat in his chair, clinking the ice in his glass. "Wells run dry," he sighed. He reached over and grabbed the bottle he had been pouring from since the start of our conversation. The glass clinked as it tapped the lip of the cup, and scotch flowed out. He nodded to me, gesturing for my glass, and filled my cup in kind. Then my grandfather asked me something that I'd never expected. "Have you ever thought about killing yourself?" He mused. It was so nonchalant. By this time, my lips were a bit loose from the buzz of the scotch. "Never," I proclaimed. It wasn't in my nature to feel sorry for myself, and I didn't have a chemical imbalance, so the thought truly never did cross my mind. "I have," he frowned. "Why?" I asked tentatively. "Because I thought it would get easier." "What would get easier?" "Living with myself." He turned to me. "I'm not sure I understand," I admitted. "I'm going to tell you something." He paused. "Something that I regret very much." This was the thing that my grandfather told me. There was this boy that lived on my street growing up, named Philip. He was a frail kid. He took a sip from his glass. Philip was bullied by the other kids at school. They would push him around, beat on him, steal his lunch, and no one did anything because, well, my grandfather trailed off searching for a word. "It's just how things were," he explained. One day, Philip went on a walk towards the train tracks near our neighborhood. There were woods that wrapped around the neighborhood like a horseshoe, and you had to walk through them to get to the tracks. I saw Philip enter the woods. Like I said, Philip was frail. He wouldn't go to those woods if you paid him. So being a 10-year-old nosy brat, I decided to follow him. It was the middle of September, and the leaves were turning golden and falling to the ground. They covered the path so densely that it looked like the yellow brick road. Philip wasn't far from me when he reached the tracks. I kept my distance. I didn't want him to know that I was there. Otherwise, he might not go through with whatever he was there for. He stood by the tracks and just waited like he was going to catch a train. My grandfather took a drag from his cigar, held it in his mouth, and with his scythe, let it waft out. So I'm sitting there in the bushes waiting too. Well, to my surprise, the ringleader of the bullies, Kevin, happens to be riding down the sides of the train tracks. He sees poor Philip, and even from the bushes, I can tell he's up to no good. He jumps off his bike, walks up to Philip, and pushes him down. Philip fell hard and hit his head on the train tracks. He must have been seeing stars. Well, Kevin isn't through with him. He reaches into his back pocket and takes out a switchblade. He shoves the blade into Philip's face, and little Philly doesn't know what to do. Urine spreads across his pant legs. In the distance, you could hear the wail of a train horn, low and distant at first, but it was obvious it was speeding towards them. Kevin heard the train and saw Philip soil himself. The little maniac started laughing. He grabbed Philip by his lapel and dragged him over and held him above the tracks. You have to understand, Kevin hit his growth spurt early and had a bit of the strength that comes with becoming a man. Philip and I together wouldn't have been able to do anything. The train's horn was much closer now. Any minute it would have turned a corner. I didn't have much time to act, so I did the only thing I could think of. I got out from behind a tree I was using as a cover and ran towards the two. Kevin had his back towards me. Philip was still too dazed from the hit to his head to comprehend what was even happening. I picked up my pace. Momentum was on my side as I ran down the hill towards the tracks at a full sprint. The horn was dangerously close and blaring in my ears. My grandfather paused here. He looked into his cup. It was half full. As the fire danced upon the logs, its warm light flickered shadows onto my grandfather's face. He sighed, closing his eyes, and said, I pushed Kevin with all the force I could muster. Philip carried out of Kevin's grip and onto the other side of the tracks. Kevin fell face first into the railroad. His nose made an audible crunch when it made contact with the metal railing, and blood exploded from his face. He tried getting up, almost did too, but lost his balance. I looked once more at Philip as he stumbled to his feet. That's when the train hit Kevin. The train launched him like a plunger hitting a pinball. He went flying, propelled by the colossal force. His body struck a tree on my side of the tracks, before falling still several yards away from me, broken and mangled. He looked like he was a crumbled, bloody piece of paper. My grandfather took a swing, then let out a ragged breath. You were just trying to help, I concluded, trying to console him. My grandfather gave me a sideways look. You misunderstand, he laughed dryly. I don't regret pushing Kevin. That piece of shit had it coming. 13 years old, and he was already an evil bastard. No, I wish that was the end of the story. I could feel my flesh break out into goosebumps by this time. I took a swing of scotch and let the fiery concoction slide down my throat and into my gut, hopefully to warm the gathering ice that was forming in its bed. I nodded to my grandfather, signaling to continue. He began. You see, Philip was out in those woods to meet someone who had been writing him letters. The train was barreling down the tracks between us, and I could only catch quick glimpses of Philip in the brief spaces between the train tracks. That's when I saw him peeking around the tree. He was a balding man with greasy brown hair and an oily mustache. He was wearing these Coke bottle glasses that made his eyes bug out. Every car that passed by brought a new image of the man closer to Philip, like a comic panel from hell. I screamed to warn him. I screamed until I tasted blood, but Philip couldn't hear me. The train horn drowned my voice out. The man was just behind him now. Philip was still in shock from the whole incident. He didn't even react when the man snatched him up. He got about 5 steps away when Philip began to struggle. He kicked and thrashed, but it was of no use. The man pinned him against a tree and turned him around. Phil fought some more, jerking about desperately to break free. But the man hit Phil. He hit him over and over until Phil stopped resisting. I ran until I found an adult, and I screamed until they got help. The police were called out, but by the time they got to the tracks, Philip and his abductor were gone. A search was conducted, but Phil was never found. They found the letters underneath his bed in his room. There were dozens of them. Some had crude drawings of Phil and another boy. The letters spoke about a place that the author wanted to take Phil to, somewhere where bullies didn't exist. The letters seemed to be responses to other letters that the town assumed Phil had been writing. The last letter specified the train as the location the two would meet. As for Kevin, no one suspected me. Kevin had a bottle of liquor he stole from his old man's stash, stuffed away in his backpack. The police figured Kevin got drunk and fell onto the tracks. Accidental suicide. I was the only one who knew the truth. I pushed Philip into the arms of that piece of shit. I killed Philip. My grandfather sobbed. Shortly after, his sobs turned into whimpers, and then into rhythmic breaths. He had drunken himself into his slumber. I left him there, in his favorite chair, to finally rest after hearing the weight of that secret for 60 years. My grandfather died that night. The coroner declared his cause of death to be heart failure by natural causes. He went into his sleep peacefully. I don't believe my grandfather killed Philip. It wasn't a push from my grandpa that brought Philip out into those woods. It was the failure of everyone in that town. The torment from the bullies, the lack of action from the parents and teachers, the blind eye of the classmates. Philip could have been saved. And I think my grandfather dedicated the rest of his life to save as many people as he could because of that day. My grandfather wasn't a superhero like Spider-Man. He was a human. He had flaws and regrets. It would be a disservice to his memory not to tell his story. That's why I'm posting this here, to honor my grandfather.